Hello and welcome to the Global Innovators in Business series. In this series, we interview leaders and innovators from different fields to share their experiences and advice with undergraduate students to provide inspiration and motivation. Today we have with us Joe Rehmann. Joe is the founder and group CEO of Victory Farms. So, first off, tell us more about Victory Farms.
Sure. Yeah. At a very macro level, food systems today are accounting for a quarter of global CO2 emissions. And as a species, we haven't really improved that number. In fact, it's probably getting worse. So at a very macro level, our growth as a species is actually negatively impacting the planet more and more. And fundamentally, we believe that we can create food that's actually contributing in a positive way to both social and environmental needs. That's the macro umbrella. Within Africa, there's a massive food deficit, specifically protein deficit. So in East Africa, Kenyans or East Africans are consuming about 10, maybe 20% of the protein that they should be consuming, which has a lot of knock-on effects for the coming generations in terms of malnutrition in children. Something like a third are malnourished, which just has a whole, it almost guarantees or locks in poverty for the future, because then it doesn't matter how much you invest in education or anything else. So getting the food system right in Africa is one of the most fundamental building blocks for both the global environment and also to unlocking a path for some form of sustainable development out of poverty for the continent. And so those are the macro conditions. And then if we zoom in as to what are the different building blocks that could get us on that journey, more sustainable. So Africa's shifting more and more toward a hoofed animal diet as the wild populations of fish are collapsing or have collapsed. So tilapia in Lake Victoria is down 95% in a generation. So the supply of wild catch. So that is effectively a collapsed source of protein, and it's not going to come back anytime soon. So in order for us to shift the African diet off of hoofed animals and onto more sustainable forms of protein, which could be poultry or fish, we need to find ways to build at scale food solutions that can address that need. And aquaculture is not a new thing. So aquaculture, for the last 50 years, aquaculture with salmon and shrimp and other species, aquaculture has been building larger and larger in tilapia too. And interestingly, in tilapia, aquaculture records go back 4,000 years. So in Egyptian ancient with the pharaoh and all that, they used to farm tilapia next to the pyramids. And so if we think about this as a disruptor case, if we think about the millions of smallholders involved in tilapia aquaculture today around the world, the practices that they're using, particularly in Africa today, are almost identical to 4,000 years ago. The introduction of any forms of technology is minuscule. And so there's this opportunity for us to come in and take 50 years of learnings from salmon and some of the other aquaculture industries, adapt them for African aquaculture, for tilapia, and then basically create an industry that can scale.
Okay, tell us about the top 3 breakthroughs in the top aquaculture development that you guys have to create and help drive through Victory Farms.
Yeah, absolutely. So in aquaculture, there's a budding field, which is land-based aquaculture. And so 4,000 years ago, that was farming in ponds, and that's still the dominant way of farming tilapia in Africa and actually most of the world. But now it's moved for salmon and for some other species, it's moved into actual infrastructure. And it's called a recirculatory aquaculture system, the super generic term. But basically it means that they recirculate the water through the system. It's very efficient. It's disease controlled. It can be very good in terms of making sure that one species doesn't get out. So that system we've adapted for tilapia. And so we now run by far Africa's largest RAS system, if you will, where we actually hatch eggs from the tilapia in this incubation system, which is a recirc. And that's enabled, it's been a massive enabler. So the cost of producing a baby fish for us is maybe 1/5 of our competition. And so that's enabled us to start to take the cost structure of the industry and start to break it down. So the RAS system would be one. The second major innovation in the space is something we've just borrowed from Norway, which is large-scale cage systems or pen systems in the lake. And so in Kenya, when we arrived, there maybe were a few folks farming with 3 by 3 meter cages. We're farming in a 30-meter cage. So it's from a technology perspective, there's not any electronics inside of it, but from a labor efficiency perspective, it's something like 100 times more efficient. So the unit level economics, which of course translates into making fish affordable for everyone.
Interesting.
And I think maybe the third innovation would actually just be talent leadership. So if we look at the types of people who are attracted into aquaculture, you don't get a great range of talent. You get some great biologists and a few other people in that category, certainly some great aquaculturalists, but you don't get a range of disciplines. And so building an industry doesn't just take technical specialists, it takes the full spectrum of people. And I think one of the things that we've focused on a lot, thankfully, a lot of really fantastic folks have joined our platform in the years, is building out a team with diversity on it.
David Epstein spoke about range, talks about like how having different set of skill sets come together and build parks, different ideas. So how did you start off, like right after graduation? What was your path? And how did what you did afterward, investment banking, lead you towards your current journey?
Thanks. Yeah. So I've been very passionate actually about sustainable agriculture for a long time. At the university I went to, there was no agri anything. It was pretty much liberal arts and engineering and such. And so on my journey, the way I looked at it was there is time in your career to build fundamental skill sets. And those skill sets are things that you carry with you and create a long-term dividend. And while I was an undergrad, and even when I was in investment banking, I did do a couple trips to Africa. I looked at starting a pineapple business with a good investment banking friend. We ended up not doing it, but I looked quite seriously at it, but frankly didn't feel ready. And him and I actually had the same chat where we're like 2 years into banking and we just felt like we weren't there yet to be launching a business. And so I think there's a lot of passion and desire to get something going and to have an impact, and it takes time. So to start the clock on that process, my personal view on it is there isn't a right or a wrong. There's folks who do it fresh out of there's people who drop out of undergrad. There's not a right or a wrong path. And so I think a lot of it is individual specific and very much about listening to your heart. But that being said, from my own experience, I ended up spending almost 5 years in investment banking. And I found that built a very solid base. And when it comes even to today, I still work with my whole accounting team and finance team on how to think about the building blocks of finance, which is, of course, a critical function in any organization. And so whether it's that or consulting or even marketing or another angle, I think that the large employers or some of the traditional paths can offer great learning blocks of time. So if you look at it as, look, I'm going to do 2 years or 4 years or whatever it is as a learning stage, and I'm going to get the most that I can because these big employers have fantastic people and programs and exposure. So I'm just going to soak everything up, deliver what I can deliver, but I'm not in any way going to let that take me off my path. I'm going to look at this as how I build myself so that when I do launch on my own or join a venture, I'm bringing more with me when I take that step.
Very interesting. Would you recommend starting a startup right after graduation, or based off of your analysis, you would be hesitant in doing so?
Look, there's some kind of famous billionaires who aren't even really sure of the value of a college education versus the value of just going into entrepreneurship. And that's almost like entrepreneurship as a religion. I look at entrepreneurship more as a discipline than a religion. So, and I think that I really fundamentally believe that diversity by itself is a value to an organization or basically almost to anything. And as a discipline, we don't want a team of just entrepreneurs either. So every time I'm doing team building, I'm looking at how can we challenge the team? How can we create sparks in the team, like positive friction? And there's a lot of elements to that. But I think just starting a company out of undergrad could be great, but I would then really want to see the entrepreneur also, there's not going to be a lot of maturity just by definition from a 22-year-old, but then I'd really want to see that entrepreneur has been as introspective as possible around what are my weaknesses? Where are my gaps? And that's difficult, right? You get into this little quadrant of things that you know and the things that you don't know that you don't know. And it's really hard to know what's in that quadrant when you haven't had a lot of professional experience. So trying to find ways to bridge that gap either through, okay, like maybe one person's a business major, one person's a biology major. We're like, that's going to be a much better biotech startup than one or the other. So I think trying to make sure that you build that complementary team in some way, shape, or another will definitely increase the chances of success. But I've also talked to some young undergrads who really want to start something, but they don't really have a great idea. I think that's fine. Don't invent an idea to solve that problem. Don't go on like a 20-day whiteboarding session to solve that problem. Getting real world experience, either through professional activities or through kind of extracurricular activities, getting that can help you develop theses, which are grounded in real world problems, which can then enable that the unique selling point or the value proposition of that entrepreneurial idea in a much more guided way rather than an academic way.
Thank you so much. That's really good advice. Okay, so going from a more traditional starting point in your career, how did that transition happen into fish farm?
Sure. So for me, I never lost a passion or an interest. And in fact, it was just a big crescendo in my whole life. I never lost a passion or an interest in the impact side of what I wanted to do. And I had a personal interest in sustainable agriculture at large. Like I said at the beginning, I'm sure this planet can feed itself in a net positive way for the environment. I'm sure. I just don't think we've really applied ourselves to that problem. So that kind of fundamental thesis has never changed. So whether it's pineapples or fish or anything else, it all goes back to something that's very central to me around sustainable agriculture. So for me, there was this crescendo in my life where I was building skills. I was happy in investment banking. I enjoyed what I was doing, but there was a crescendo as to what I was missing, which was this more purpose-driven career. And I don't think there's anything wrong with investment banking. I'm a capitalist, but I didn't find a great sense of purpose in it in the work I was doing. And so at some point, and it felt quite clear in my own life, the FOMO of not being able to, at some point, the reality that I might fail was a much less severe consequence than the reality that I might never try. And I don't think everyone's going to have the same compass or the same tipping point. But for me, that was a really useful metric because as soon as I reached a point where I was like, I really don't mind if I fail. I actually don't mind at all. Then any sort of fear or reputational risk or any derailing my whatever platinum CV, who cares? What I really care about, I don't want to get 10 years further in my career without having had this. And if I get to that point 10 years and I've got a couple failures, I'm okay with that. And that for me was a very settling feeling. And then taking that plunge into entrepreneurship of going all in didn't feel that risky.
And the fish farms?
Oh, sorry. No. So then I think mentorship is extremely important. Everybody's got their own path, but in my journey, I have a handful of mentors that I've had, some for 10 years and some for 20 years that go back into my undergrad, early in my undergrad experience. And they're still mentors for me today. And so as it turned out, as I was coming out of an MBA, it was one of my mentors who'd been following my journey through investment banking, but knew I wasn't going to land up as a long-term banker, who then said, hey, I'm working on a large transaction. A small piece of that is in a fish farm in Ghana. Do you want to just go 3 months and figure it out? And that's when I knew like right away, because I didn't have any skills beyond due diligence. So that's when I knew this is my chance to apply what I know, contribute something to their efforts, but also learn a whole bunch about something new. And so I think that development and nurturing of a mentor network, and I think it's more than just one person. I think you can have several mentors who help you. And some mentors become more important over time. Some, of course, will become less important. But being really open to developing those relationships, investing in those relationships can then create these out-of-the-box opportunities that you couldn't, there's no job descriptions. There's no one's posting these jobs online. And the career center of even pretty much any school isn't going to have them. So in order to get to that field that you might be aiming for, mentors can actually be a way of ricocheting over there.
And once you started this project in Ghana, going into the next step, how people will get experience for a few months, then I'll go into New York and continue the regular work. What was the spark, or what was the kind of like light that, okay, this is something that I would like to do in my career or continue on a good track?
Yeah, that was when I started. It was a 3-month due diligence project. At the end of it, I was supposed to go back to either Amsterdam or London to work in private equity. And so the role was already there. So I felt very safe in taking this risk because I figured I'd go back into what I know how to do. But at the end of that 3 months, the whiteboarding side of the white protein thesis in Africa became much more real to me. I got to meet the people. I got to go to the villages. I got to work with people who lived in mud huts. And the impact side, and also on the environmental side, I got to see what happens if we build this the right way. And the amount of innovation potential through both social and environmental hadn't been fully explored or built out in the business I was at, but we had been scratching at the surface and I could start to see what was possible. When that kind of whiteboarding became like a fire in my heart, then I was like, okay, no amount of doing deals back in London or Amsterdam, no amount of that is going to satiate what I know that this business, if we build it the right way, can do. So then it became actually a very easy decision to flip.
Yes. And now, quite a few years down the road, you're like leading this company into just finished the B round. Congratulations, really. So what is the company like now? What is the scale? What is the impact that you are creating in Kenya and around?
One of the really rewarding parts, and very much my motivation behind it, is how impact scales. And I think it's something that's less understood or less talked about, at least from an MBA perspective. Passion by itself is just a hot fire. But if there's structure in place, and then of course, talent, capital, whatever, a business model that makes sense. But if those pieces are in place, impact can roll out much faster. And so in terms of scale, Victory has 750 employees. And I just found out, I think yesterday, that our Rwanda business hit 100 employees. And I thought it was at 30. We have a phenomenal leadership team in Rwanda. We've developed, nurtured them in Kenya, sent them off, and they're replicating the business model. Of course, as Group CEO, I'm involved, but I'm not involved in any of the day-to-day, month-to-month types of activities. And so just seeing that business executing, overachieving on its plan, and how that impact that's multiplied that's just really rewarding to see how that happens. Because as an individual, it's totally impossible to achieve anything. Like it has to be done through a team and through a platform.
You're severely making a dent, at least in like malnutrition in Africa, or creating jobs. Yeah. All of these things come together with a business mindset going into a developing country, which is a very different mindset than we've interviewed the CEO or Matthew Bannock, who was the only other network, or like other nonprofits, but this is a very unique approach of taking business into it. There was an interesting question that he posed, I think on LinkedIn a few days ago, which is there's an employee that's has a very menial work, and this person could easily be replaced by a more automated process. But even though it might be like a lower cost to the automated process, in some rare situations, even though you just mentioned you're a capitalist, you would prefer to create that job, create that work. What is the thought process going behind that, and why do you take that route in this situation?
It's fundamentally about creating balance. And so if we just focus on what has the most positive impact on the community, we're probably never going to make a profit. If we just focus on what generates the most profit, I do think we generate more profit in the short term, but I do think fundamentally we start to destroy the entire foundation of what we're building the business on, which is the community. And so what I was hoping to highlight in that is that a balanced decision-making model is required, and we do have to have heart, and we do have to care about the people. And managing 130 people is difficult, right? It's on paper, I would much rather not have to manage 130 people, and I'd rather have to manage one piece of equipment, much easier. But what are the pros and the cons? So from a financial perspective, of course, a calculation to be made. From a business complexity standpoint, there's a calculation to be made. We can't only choose to benefit the community. We have to create balance. We do have to automate certain things. But if we try to look at it from every single meeting I'm in with the community, and I do quite a bit of engagement, I don't think I've ever been in a meeting where we haven't discussed jobs. And so the dignity that is created through work for someone who's earning, and these are folks earning in the range of $4 a day, but with that, they're able to support usually an entire family. And so the dignity that's created in this particular department is almost only women. But so for this 130 women who are able to then have the dignity to take care of their families and feed their kids, and we're in an area with incredible poverty. So there's almost no jobs, right? You're probably at 95% unemployment, like a number that doesn't even compute. So to be able to address that in a meaningful way in the community creates this genuine respect between community members and management, which you can't buy that, right? There's no amount of CSR or community donations because there's no dignity associated with a handout. But there is a great deal of dignity associated with, I worked really hard today, I earned my keep, and there's a relationship between me and this company, and that means I can support my family. And so I think that we need to take those considerations as part of a balanced evaluation process.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very nice answer. I think the final question is just, what is your advice for a student and young professional going forward if they're looking to create impact in their career? What is takeaway? Share with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my view is that the biggest driver of value in your career is going to be listening to yourself, uncovering your own passion, and then investing in yourself, trusting yourself, nurturing. And of course, education is designed to basically do that. But there's so many dimensions to how you can, within your 4-year period of time, what can you accomplish during that time? And so what was very helpful to me was focusing on what I thought did the most for my development, not actually for my CV. And then so my CV started to look like a bit of a hodgepodge, like working at Morgan Stanley in New York as an internship. That was, of course, a great accomplishment. And then my primary activity outside of work was actually agricultural value chain project in Ghana. And so those two things don't fit together. There's not a lot of managing directors in New York in investment banking who care a lot about the ag value chain in Ghana, but the underlying pieces of the passion all were starting to fit together. And so my view on it is nurture your passion, allow it to develop. If it's conventional, that's fine. If it's unconventional, that's also fine. So try to find the balance between the two to let yourself go into the dimensions that you want to go into, but don't be afraid of saying, and the thought certainly went through my head at some point, how many years am I going to spend in investment banking before I start to go after things I'm really passionate about? And that thought can revisit you periodically, but I wouldn't also be afraid at all because you can get things from those experiences too, which will then help you do other things.
Such great. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure. No, it's great to be on. Thank you. And to your listeners or watchers, the very, very best as they go through their adventures.